Hey everyone, I'm Alex, and today at Big Al Books, I'm doing my first wrap-up video. I just want to say that I tried to do the booktuber thing where I hold the stack of books up beside me and make a smug smile for a thumbnail, and I dropped the whole stack. So clearly have some practicing to do. But anyway, January 2017, not a great month for the world, but a decent month for my reading at least. I got through 9 books this month. There's some cheating in there, but we'll get into that later. So let's get started. Alright, so the first novel is the longest and probably the best. This is Roberto Bolaño's 2666, and to be fair, I read most of this in December of 2016, but just happened to finish the last 50 pages on the morning of January 1st. So it's not really a January read, but I didn't have a channel in December, so I'm gonna include it in this wrap-up. This is well known for being Bolaño's final novel. This is what he was working on until he died of liver disease, so there is definitely an unfinished quality. It is big, it is messy, it is violent. Most of the stories revolve around a series of murders and disappearances of women living in a Mexican city called Santa Teresa, which is based on Ciudad Juarez. So that only adds to the horror of this novel when you realize that these are murders that are continuing to happen and they're happening in real life. Very depressing. I would like to make a review video to talk about this book in greater depth because I feel like a few pithy statements here in a wrap-up will do no justice to a complex book like this, but I'm having such a hard time trying to organize my thoughts. I cannot talk articulately about this book. I have so many questions. I don't know what the point of it all was. I don't know why Bolaño chose to write it in the way that he did. I really don't know, but one thing I can say is that I am thinking about it so much. Even though I finished it a month ago, this book is staying with me. So I will say that it's not for every kind of reader, but if you are a reader who's not afraid to get real dark and depressing, and if you are up for a challenge, 2666 is definitely an experience and is one that will probably stay with you for the rest of your life, for better or for worse. So if 2666 is long and complicated, Of Mice and Men is its opposite in that it is short and simple. I read this book because I'm in teaching, and one of my teachables is English. And every English classroom I go to, I find this novel. I think it's forced upon teenagers because it's really short. You can get through it in under an hour, and then everybody can write an essay on who's the most tragic character in the novel and why. But if it were up to me, I would never choose to teach this novel to teenagers. I just don't think that the whole farm drama is really that relevant. I think that the treatment of the themes is overdone. Like, it's too obvious, the tragedy of the American dream. Like, that's just not a theme that appeals to me in the first place. And as for the depressing ending, it didn't faze me that much because I hadn't connected with the characters that well. The only character that I even liked was Crooks, the guy who worked in the stables, and he was only in there for a chapter, which was not enough to save this thing. So I probably wouldn't have disliked it so much if this book wasn't so popular and read in schools all the time. But as it stands, I seriously think that it is time to call the exterminator and get this thing out of our schools. Boom! This next book was a total cover buy. This is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, and ever since I was a little kid, I have been obsessed with medieval monks, which is strange. I can't explain it, but they just intrigue me for some reason. So I couldn't resist this novel. It's about a series of murders that are going on at a medieval abbey, and they bring this wise old monk to try to stop the murders, and he's basically Sherlock Holmes. His name is William of Baskerville, so not that subtle. He uses logic and deductive reasoning to try to stop these murders before they get worse. And the book didn't live up to the premise for me. I didn't really get too invested in the mystery storyline. Also, I felt it was constantly interrupted by these tangents of historical information, which was interesting stuff. It's stuff like about the difference between the Benedictine and the Florentine monks, and why St. Francis's vow of poverty had a lot of political implications, especially with a pope who wanted to spend a lot of money. So it's interesting stuff, but I didn't feel like Eco was good at seamlessly incorporating it into the text. It felt very jarring. It was like, oh God, here comes another 30-page rant coming on. So I didn't love the writing, but you know, I don't regret reading this. It was fine. Monks rule, whatever. The next two novels I read at the same time. They are The Break by Katharina Vermette, which is currently on the long list for the Canada Reads 2017 list. And this is Birdie by Tracy Lindbergh, and this was on the 2016 Canada Reads list, and this was a reread for me. But I wanted to read these both at the same time because they deal with a lot of the same themes. They are both about Indigenous women who go through a certain trauma, and it's about them and their families, and in particular female family members coming together at this point of crisis and trying to recover, which sounds like a kind of generic premise, but they're actually both really interesting books about families. I've done a joint review for both of them, so if you want more information, you can check that out. But the quick synopsis is The Break is about what happens in the aftermath of a sexual assault in Edmonton, and this is a very character-based novel. If you like the inner workings of a family, this is a good one for that. And Birdie is about a woman who's had a tremendous life filled with so much trauma, and she has a complete mental breakdown, and it's about her thinking about her life and trying to get it back together in the end. And it is a really great book. This one is so quirky and strange, but powerful and affecting at the same time, so I would recommend both of these. Up next, I have The Professor and Villette by Charlotte Bronte, and I read these two together because they are both drawing from the same autobiographical experience of a time when Charlotte Bronte was working as a teacher in Belgium. And it's very interesting to see how she reworks the material in these novels. So first up is The Professor, and this is one of her early novels, and it was rejected for publication a bunch of times in her life, so it did not appear until after she died. And it's really not a strong novel. I can't say that I enjoyed it very much. It is a short novel that feels very long because it's just not that interesting. It's kind of like a love story. Interesting for a Bronte novel, the protagonist is a male, and he ends up in Belgium, and he falls in love with one of his students, which isn't even scandalous because she's like 19. And it's about their relationship. It's pretty forgettable. I would really only recommend it if you're going to check out Villette next. Villette was a really powerful book. Villette, on the other hand, is the much stronger novel of the two. In this case, the English teacher in Belgium is a female, and her name is Lucy Snowe. She's a very interesting narrator in that she withholds things from the reader like crazy. Like, she will keep back important details, or she will just kind of not really tell you how she's feeling and kind of leaves you to figure out what actually is going on in her head. So I did enjoy that about reading this. She's very much not like Jane Eyre, who is such like a warmth and personable narrator, and Jane Eyre also has the better plot. Villette is long, but not a lot happens. But at the same time, while this does not have that same universal appeal that Jane Eyre does, there's a lot to like about this quiet, understated novel. This is Charlotte Bronte's final novel, and it does have that sense of maturity and on reflection and looking back at a life. And I think that her writing is at her finest here. There were quite a few paragraphs that had me just like stopping and going back and reading them again. So gorgeous prose in this book. This novel asks a lot of big questions about faith and the purpose of our time on Earth. Lucy Snowe comes to the realization that for most people, life on Earth is pretty miserable, it's shitty, it's lonely, but she starts to think that that could be okay if maybe our time on Earth is just this brief blip on the radar in the eternal happiness that the afterlife has to offer. As you can see, Charlotte Bronte is grappling with a lot of big ideas in this text. So while it does not have the universal appeal of Jane Eyre, it is also a lot less childish, and there are no problematic mad women in the attic, so that's a win. Next up, we have The Sellout by Paul Beatty, which is the most recent winner of the Man Booker Prize, and I gotta say that this was an awesome choice because this novel is great. It's very funny and had me laughing out loud a lot, but it's like that kind of laughter where you feel bad because he is taking on some serious, heavy subjects like race relations in America. And at the start of this novel, our main character is on trial at the Supreme Court for bringing back slavery and segregation into his hometown of Dickens, California. And it seems like so outrageous that we think, oh, slavery and segregation are so wrong, such a dark chapter of American history. But I think what Beatty wants to push the reader into considering how segregation is still alive and at play in America in quite a few ways. So he doesn't want to be a part of this post-race society where nobody talks about race. In a lot of ways because no one feels comfortable to talk about race. I think Beatty wants to bring it up to the table and does not want this to be something that we ignore. This is just satire that worked really well for me. Paul Beatty is a poet, and I loved watching him riff and play with language and slang and rhythm. It could feel manic at times, like it felt like there was too much coming at you, but it seemed appropriate for like the mad feel of this book. So overall, I really enjoyed it, and this is the second year in a row where I have absolutely loved the Man Booker Prize winner, so hopefully they keep it up. And last up, we have The Robber Bride by Margaret Atwood, which I just finished today. This was a pretty mediocre read for me, which I'm sad to say because it's over 500 pages long and no one likes wasting their time. But this book was just kind of a disappointment. The premise is there's this mysterious she-devil homewrecker woman who swoops into the lives of these three friends and steals all of their husbands to some capacity. So it sounds like it should be juicy and interesting, but it just isn't for some reason. I think it's because we have these three main characters and they each tell the story from their perspective, but that just gets very repetitive, hearing the same story 3 times. And Atwood also takes us through all of their backstories and their childhoods, which just I was not interested in at all. So there were really no compelling characters, especially the men. They all come across as just way too helpless and pathetic. So I can't say that I really recommend this one. This was my second Margaret Atwood novel, and I really enjoyed The Blind Assassin. Did not much care for this one, and hope that it goes better next time I pick a Margaret Atwood novel up. Alright, so that's January all wrapped up. There are a lot more just okay books than I would have liked, so here's to hoping for a better February, and thanks for watching.